And we are live with another edition of the College Pride Press podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brad Kreppel, and I am joined by my co-host, Brett Siegel, down at Louisville. And we have a special edition recap podcast. We usually do it on Sunday nights, but due to the late night PK80 games, we wanted to do it on Monday night. So we can talk about those games, and we will discuss everything that went on in the crazy week in college basketball, feast week, so many different tournaments, different matchups, and a lot of movement around the top 25 poll, as I'm sure you've seen, both in the AP top 25 and the College Pride Press voted on students. So I'm going to throw it back to Brett, kind of get some opening thoughts and initial feast week reactions and kind of what stood out to you from the past week in college basketball.
Welcome back, college basketball fans. Hope everybody had a wonderful Thanksgiving with their family or wherever they ended up being, and hope everybody had a great time and hope they had a great week of sports. I mean, outside of college basketball, we had some really good college football games, and then even in college basketball, we had all these tournaments that went on. We had the Bahamas and all the craziness that went on down there. We had a stunning Maui Invitational. We had the Phil Night, like you said, and I mean, we really got a glimpse at some of these teams about who they truly are, and a lot of question marks about most of the top 25 teams coming into the season. We got a true look at them because they all played each other in these tournaments this weekend, and if they didn't, they played in those 14 tournaments, which I think are pointless, but still, it's top 25 basketball, so we really got a nice look at them, and it's going to be a fun week again.
Yeah, it was great, and the tournament that kind of stood out to me was the game in the Bahamas, as you mentioned, Battle for Atlantis, and obviously the main game was actually the seventh place game that featured both Arizona and Purdue, two teams that really were not expected to be in that tournament, and Arizona had completely fallen off the map. They were the number 2 team in the AP. They lost to NC State. They lost to SMU, and then finally they lost to Purdue by quite a bit. They lost by 25. So not a great trip for Arizona. I think it's safe to say it wasn't a great trip for those guys. I think Sean Miller has some work to do. The team misses Raleigh Alkins, very underrated guy, great defender, can provide some spark and ability to get to the rim. I think they miss him, and kind of getting the old school with Alonzo Trier, who's a junior, with Parker Jackson Cartwright, and combining that with DeAndre Ayton and Alex Barcelo and Emmanuel Acott, some of those really talented freshmen they have. We're going to talk a little bit about Arizona in our sweat, don't sweat, but I just want to talk about that whole Bahamas was ridiculous. That tournament ended up being a complete mess, and some of the matchups we expected didn't really end up the way that we wanted to when that original bracket came out. What were your thoughts on Purdue and Arizona being in that last place game?
The fact that Northern Iowa was in the championship,
that was ridiculous.
Think that they were going to even win a game in this tournament? What shouldn't it have been Western Kentucky versus Northern Iowa in that 7th place game? Like the 7th place game that was played, a lot of people had as the championship game. Like I had Purdue versus Arizona in the championship. I did not think both teams were going to be that bad. But
it was horrible. It was horrible, and you touched on Maui a little bit, so I want to talk a little bit about that. Wichita State and Notre Dame in the final. Wichita State kind of limped to the final, but they were able to get those wins. Notre Dame looked really good. Bonzi Colson, Matt Farrell, those guys are legit, and they've got some really talented players around them. They've moved up there in the top 5 now in the AP poll. Lots of talent. Look out for the Fighting Irish. Mike Bray's got a good team this year. All right, so other headlines we talk about here in the onset. Michael Porter's injury status, a huge question mark right now. Originally, it was stated that he was going to be out for the year with a back injury after it was labeled a hip injury. So now we see a cryptic Instagram post that says that he may be back before that. Brett, what are your thoughts on this weird injury situation with Michael Porter?
Honestly, who knows? I mean, there really is no way to tell how long he's going to be out. It's all speculation with the reports of people saying, oh, he's going to be out for 4 months. He's going to be out for the year. Like, the only people that really know how long he's going to be out is his family, him, and his doctor. And they're probably not going to disclose that. And it's going to be one of those hyped up things, and the media will eat it up for weeks. But with that being said, Michael Porter will miss a significant amount of time. He'll probably miss 1 to 2 months if he's not out for the whole season. He'll probably come back sometime mid-conference play. And by then, Missouri will already be deep in their season, will already either be making a run for the tournament or they'll be out of it by then. But the biggest winner of this whole Michael Porter situation is his brother, Jonte Porter. And you look at what he did down at Disney in their tournament. They played Long Beach State, St. John's, and then West Virginia. Ultimately blew a lead against West Virginia and lost in the championship game. But Jonte played really well. He had 15, 16, and 9 points in those 3 games respectively, and averaged about 2-3 blocks a game. Was prone to foul trouble. He fouled out in both St. John's and West Virginia late in those games. But if he can really step up and be a scorer for them, I mean, it's not going to fill the shoes that Michael Porter Jr. left or is leaving right now. But it will definitely give Missouri a significant boost because they're going to need scoring in a tough SEC, and we're going to touch on the SEC a little bit later, but really, really good this year. It's kind of surprising to a lot of people. And if Missouri wants to make it out of there into the tournament and flip around their script from last season, Jonte Porter will definitely be a big part of that.
I think it adds a lot of intrigue because if he is able to return, whether that be in 2 months or 2.5 months, in February or January, it adds a lot of intrigue to that Missouri team because they need to continue to build a resume and avoid bad losses until they can get Michael back. And then if he's able to showcase his skills and they can get a few wins with him in the lineup, they can put themselves in position for an NCAA tournament berth. But if they have some bad losses coming up before he's able to get back on the court, I'm not really sure that the risk and reward even out there for Michael to suit it up again after a serious back injury that could cost him millions if he has another injury coming back this season. I think it could cost him, the potential to be a top 3 NBA draft pick.
It's not could cost him millions. It will cost him millions.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So I think if Missouri wants to kind of get him back and still have a successful season, they need to avoid those bad losses and still build a resume even without him on the court. All right, next up, we're going to talk about Virginia's early season impact. They have had kind of a surprising start to the year. Kyle Guys look really good. As we're recording, they're in it with Wisconsin, but they have 3 top 100 wins according to KenPom. They beat VCU, Vanderbilt, and Rhode Island. What are your thoughts on Virginia after they had so many guys leave and graduate and transfer? They're still in it, and they're still playing that Virginia basketball way with Tony Bennett.
Yeah, I wasn't really high on Virginia coming into the season. I thought that they're going to finish around 7th, 8th, maybe even 9th in the ACC. I'm sorry. But, I mean, they've kind of surprised a lot of people so far this year. I mean, they haven't really played that marquee team yet. Wisconsin maybe is that probably the best team that they've played so far. You look at what they've done so far, a road win at VCU, who's probably will be a tournament team, and then neutral court wins over this past week against Vanderbilt and Rhode Island, 2 solid teams and 2 really well-coached teams. And once again, it's just Tony Bennett's defense eating up everybody else's offense. And you even look at what they're doing tonight. Right now, they're tied, or not tied, I'm sorry. They're up 24-20 on Wisconsin at the half. And they're just limiting the possessions by the other team. And when you have a scoring team like Wisconsin has showed that they can be a scoring team at times. And if Ethan Happ can't get going, and he's only touching the ball a few times here and there, then Wisconsin's not going to put up points and Tony Bennett's winning. So I think that style of play is just so different, and it's so hard to adjust to that no matter who's on the court for Virginia, they're still going to find success, even if they can't score.
Yeah, I think that the defense is still very good, which is what we expected, but the offense has been pretty good. I mean,
it hasn't been terrible.
Yeah, it hasn't been terrible. Kyle Guy's been shooting the lights out, 48% from 3. Devin Hall shooting 46% from 3. And Ty Jerome shooting 40% from 3. I mean, it's a small sample size, but they've got 3 quality wins, have a chance to get their 4th tonight against Wisconsin. And they've got that great defense and some players that have really developed over the years. So look out for the Cavaliers. They're always a tough team to play with their style of play and their pace. So it's going to be interesting to see them match up against some of the big boys in the ACC, but they could have, 4 impressive resume wins by the time we get to that.
And also, like with Shayok transferring and Prentice graduating, like there were so many questions coming in as to how good of a scoring team they would be, because at the end of last season, they were only putting up about like 40 points a game. I'm pretty sure they only scored like 28 in one game at the end of the season last year. And everybody was just freaking out about Virginia. Everybody thought Tony Bennett was going to leave because all these players were transferring. And then he winds up staying. They don't really bring in anybody. And who are they stuck with? They're stuck with Devon Hall, Kyle Guy, and Isaiah Wilkins. And nobody really thought Virginia was going to do much. And then all these other guys are just emerging out of nowhere. And like you said, guys that have been in the program and developed and are now getting their chance for big minutes. So, I mean, if you can play defense and you can run in Tony Bennett's system, Virginia's going to be successful, and they'll be there in the ACC.
Absolutely. So next up, we're going to kind of do a new segment. We had so many teams playing, so many different matchups. So we want to do a biggest winner of the week. So, Brett, who's your biggest winner of the week?
Ooh, I don't know. I mean, Western Kentucky did have a good win against Purdue. Nah, I'm not going to give it to them. I mean, it's tough. The biggest loser is easily Arizona, no doubt. I think that's everybody's biggest loser. But I would probably have to say the biggest winner is Virginia. I mean, you've looked at what they've done, and they picked up 2 solid wins against what everybody's looking at right now, 2 possible tournament teams, 3 if you count VCU. I mean, the wins against Vanderbilt and Rhode Island on the neutral court, and they weren't just close wins. They won by double figures. Against Vanderbilt, they won by 16. Against Rhode Island, they won by 15 to win the championship. And they scored in those games too. They put up 68 on Vanderbilt, 70 on Rhode Island. And if you play good defense like Virginia does, like I was saying before, and you're putting up 60 plus points, 65 plus points, they're going to win a ton of basketball games this year, just because the other team is not going to have that many possessions against a Tony Bennett style defense. They're going to be limited to about 50 points, 60 points a game in that type of system, assuming nothing breaks loose with this defense. And if they can score, like you said, then Virginia's going to be really successful. So I think they have a lot to build on that's positive from this weekend. And I think that they're heading in the right direction.
I'm going to go with Alabama as my biggest winner of the week. And, we're going to talk about that crazy game they played against Minnesota in a little bit. But, you look at that, they played really strong in that Minnesota game. And then so, we're able to rack up 2 other top 100 wins, beating UT Arlington and also beating BYU. Stuff. He's going to be my only concern with the Crimson Tide is John Petty. He sprained his ankle in that game against Minnesota. So if he's able to come back at full strength relatively soon, the Crimson Tide are going to be a tough team tough team to beat coming down in the SEC. We're going to talk a little bit about the SEC coming up as well. So we're going to kind of segue that into our recapping games of the week. We picked out a few games that kind of stood out to us in terms of, either impact or interesting storyline. So first one up, I just talked about Alabama, Minnesota. If you didn't see it, you got to go on and watch it on the Facebook feed. Alabama had all of their bench kicked out of the game because they left the bench area and went onto the court during a scrum. Nate Mason had crossed up Colin Sexton and kind of showed him up a little bit, which started the whole thing. But Alabama's bench was kicked out, and then they had a player foul out, and John Petty got injured, as I just said. So they ended up finishing the game with 3 players. And the impressive thing about that is they almost won. They only lost by 5, and they actually were down 3 points with 1:40 left, and they had an opportunity. They had the ball, so they had an opportunity to tie it up, but just couldn't get over the hump with 3 players. I mean, hats off to that effort, playing with 3 against 5 for 11 minutes of the game. It was a crazy game. I wasn't actually watching it live, but I watched the entire game afterwards, and I was just completely shocked at the dynamic of that game. It felt like an AAU game, but it got real serious once Alabama made it
as if anything couldn't go wrong for the Crimson Tide in that game, besides their whole bench getting thrown out. Then they have Ingram foul out. And then a minute after that, they have John Petty roll his ankle. And by rule, they are allowed to play that game with 3 guys on the court. And nothing taken away from those guys on the court. They played absolutely fantastic for only 3 guys there. And Colin Sexton was an absolute beast in that game, just going up and down the court, beating all 5 guys. And at one point, there was a really funny play. And Colin Sexton drove down the court, goes to the other side, goes for a lay-in, pump fakes, flicks it to a guy. He drew 3 defenders up in the air to block the shot, leaving a wide open guy for a dunk. How do you give up a dunk if you are playing with 5 guys versus 3 if you're Minnesota? If I'm Richard Pitino, I'm ripping out my hair during that game, and I'm sweating so much because you're up 2 guys and you got outscored by 3. Like, just let that sink in for a second. Colin Sexton is an unbelievable player, and the other 2 guys on the court were fantastic in that spread. Your bench was not thrown out. And you were playing practically 12 versus 3. And the fact that you could not score or defend is quite sad and kind of worrisome for Minnesota. That's just my take on that.
I mean, this looks bad for Minnesota on all fronts because number one, they kind of instigated it with Nate Mason and, that whole thing. And he was jawing. Colin Sexton was not looking to pick a fight. Even after he got crossed up, he wasn't looking to jaw back at him after he scored. And I think it just happened to work out where the scrum started in front of the Alabama bench. If it started in front of the Minnesota bench, they would have had all their guys kicked out. So I think it was kind of unlucky for Alabama. I mean, the rule is if you step onto the court, you're kicked out, which it's fair, but there were guys that had, 2 feet were on the end line and 2 feet were on the court. So it's like, well, if half your foot's on the court, are you on the court? So, did they step off? Yes, but it was almost like they were going to give their guys a high five and going into a timeout more than, try to rile up and start a fight. So very unlucky for Alabama. What an effort. Colin Sexton, oh my. He is going to be must-see TV this year, and enjoy him while you can because he's going to be a top 10 pick in the NBA draft this year.
Oh, he's going to be so much fun to watch in the SEC.
Literally, we're just you could have scored at will, and I just think, Pitino kind of let his guys hang out and shoot threes and if you have somebody who's a really good 3-point shooter, it's basically like, a warm up almost, but, it was pretty bad. It was, not good for Richard Pitino, and he's going to have to get back with his guys and figure out what's going on in terms of, both personnel and, both Nate Mason dealing with situations like that. It'll be interesting to see how he deals with that. And Rick Pitino on the sidelines was also interesting as well.
This was easily a plus for Alabama and a thumbs down.
This game was just absolutely ridiculous, and the intrigue was absolutely insane.
Rick Pitino goes up to a basketball game and all hell breaks loose.
Absolutely, that's just what happens. All right, next up, we're going to talk about one of the PK80 games, Duke versus Texas, which was a semifinal game. Also, Duke versus Florida. We can talk about that a little bit. Duke looks really, really good. It was Mo Bamba against Marvin Bagley. Brett, what were your thoughts on that game?
I thought Bamba did an outstanding job the whole game on Bagley because Marvin Bagley is that type of player where you just can't defend him. You got to try to contain him as much as you can. And Bagley didn't just contain him, but he was a blocker as well. I think he recorded 2 blocks on Bagley throughout the game. Unfortunately, he fouled out late in that one, which, in my opinion, ultimately led to Duke winning that game. Because if that game had gone to overtime and Bamba was still in the game, Bagley would not have gotten half the rebounds he did because Bagley was towering over everybody else. I think the tallest player in the game was that Ostertag dude, or however you say his name, and he's 6'8", 6'9". and his wingspan is like 4 inches, 5 inches less than Bagley. So Bagley's practically playing 5, 6 inches above everybody else at that point. Bamba can stand there with him and can bully him around a little bit. So if Bamba stays in that game, Texas has a chance in overtime. The second he was out with foul trouble, I knew that Duke was going to come back and win that game just because of the sole fact that there was nobody that could even put a hand in Marvin Bagley's face. And that's going to be a reoccurring theme all season. If there is not anybody big on any of the opponents that Duke faces, Marvin Bagley is just going to have his way, just like he did in the PK 80 this weekend. He's going to go 30 and 15 every game if there's nobody that can rough him up or box out or anything. All you need to do is just get a big guy and box him out. Make him foul you. That's all you have to do with Bagley. And it's hard to do. And there's not much you can do. But, I mean, there's not much you can do to guard Marvin Bagley. And I thought Bamba did an excellent job in that game.
Yeah, it was really a great game, and Duke, they've got some fight in them. They play three freshmen, and they play three freshmen or four freshmen and Grayson Allen, but they've come back in the Michigan State game, they came back in the Texas game, and they came back in that Florida game in the championship to win. So Coach A's got something special with those four freshmen and Grayson Allen, and they've got some fight in them, which is really good to see from a young team that has so much talent. All right, finally, our last recap game is going to be the Georgia versus St. Mary's game, which went to overtime, I believe, but that was really a great game. Jock Landale absolutely ate it up, and Yante Mayton also had a great game. What were your thoughts on this game, Brad?
Yeah, I didn't really get a chance to watch this game much, but like you said, Jock Landale was an absolute animal in this one. It went to overtime, and Georgia came out on top. And again, it just goes back to the whole SEC thing this year. It's a more experienced conference. All these guys are returning, except for a few. Like you got Kentucky, who obviously they're not returning. They're all freshmen. But you look at everybody else, they're all veteran teams, and they've gone through this before. And I think it just adds to the depth that we have been talking about with the SEC. I mean, A&M has been showing up so far this season. They look like one of the top teams to beat in the country. You got Missouri, who looks promising. Arkansas looks good, too. Georgia just pulled off this big upset over St. Mary's. Nobody saw that coming. And I don't know. I mean, the SEC may be something special this year. They may wind up getting 5, 6, possibly even 7 teams in the tournament. I don't think they will get 7. I think 5 or 6 is more the possible route. But, I mean, it was a big win for Georgia and a bad loss for St. Mary's. They're already 2 losses on the season, and their whole offense looks like it's just going through Jock Landale, and they really need to find that outside shooting. They were 4 for 13 from three-point line, unlike last season where they averaged about 6 or 7 threes a game. And their free throw shooting in this one, they were 3 for 6. And you're not going to win many games if you're not getting to the line. You got to be aggressive in the paint. You got to drive the ball. And St. Mary's just looks soft right now. And if they continue that, they're definitely not going to beat Gonzaga in the West Coast.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about St. Mary's in that West Coast Conference is, there's not that many quality teams. And so, Georgia was a top 100 team that was very beatable. I mean, this is a game they definitely should have won, and they lost in overtime. They also lost to Washington State, which is a bad loss. So, looking at their schedule, they only have 4 top 100 games left. So it's tough to build a resume with just 4 top 100 games, and 2 of them against BYU, who's 86th. So they could be out of the top 100 by the time that they play each other. And then it's Gonzaga. So if you don't beat Gonzaga, even with the BYU wins, that's not that impressive of a resume. And, then it's putting the pressure on the West Coast Conference tournament. And if they can get over Gonzaga in the tournament to get that automatic bid. So this is definitely trouble for St. Mary's. I don't think they're going to make the tournament unless they're able to, go on a ridiculous run of games, or, they're able to win the West Coast Conference tournament, which it's November 27th. So it's tough to talk about, a conference tournament so early like this. But when you don't have enough quality games on your schedule, you kind of have to rely on that conference tournament.
And this year was their chance to come out on top on the West Coast, because Gonzaga is not nearly as strong as they had been in past years. They're kind of going through a rebuilding phase of their own and still trying to find their go-to guy. And St. Mary's, most of them are all returning, so nothing should be new, and they're just choking. And like you said, bad losses to Washington State and Georgia, and those were going to kind of be two good wins in a way, you could say, in quotes. And it kind of looks good on paper because they're Power 5 teams. You look at the rest of their resume, I mean, a win at home against Seattle, that's great, but that does nothing to help your chance to get into the tournament. So they definitely hurt themselves this week.
Yeah, I mean, you want to compare them to Gonzaga. That's great. Gonzaga already has two top 100 wins, and they have 7 games coming up in the rest of the season against top 100 teams. That's compared to St. Mary's, who has 0 top 100 wins right now, and has 4 games left on their schedule. So that's a humongous difference in terms of quality of talent. And when you're filling out a tournament resume, you need those top wins and teams that fans and the committee will recognize as that's a quality win, whether it be home, away, or neutral. All right, next up, we're going to talk about the most intriguing upset of the week. We've briefly touched on a couple of these, but I just want to get Brett's thoughts on this. Arizona, Purdue, St. Mary's, Xavier, all, lost at the hands of teams that were just not as good as them. What was the most intriguing upset of the week from you?
Whew. I mean, everything that happened in the Bahamas, but I mean, yeah, everything that happened in the Bahamas and Xavier. I mean, Xavier played Arizona State and they didn't lose to Arizona State. They got absolutely manhandled by Arizona State. I forget, I'm drawing a blank on the guy's name from Arizona State, but he put up like 35, 40 points on them and nobody could do anything about it. And that was kind of concerning for me for Xavier. 'Cause coming into the year, I thought that they were going to be a really, really solid team. And they still have time to prove me wrong, but they've definitely taken a step back from what I thought they were going to be. Initially, I had them in my top 15 list for teams that could potentially win a national championship. And then they continue to play like they did against Arizona State and allow 102 points to the Sun Devils. There's no way that they're going to beat a Villanova or even a Seton Hall or Creighton in the Big East. And it's concerning early on that they gave up 102 points to Arizona State because Arizona State's not really known for scoring. So Xavier has a chance to really prove people wrong this week. They got some good games coming up this week. Starting Tuesday, they're home against Baylor, and that's a big chance for them to flip the script. And then they're home against Cincinnati. So those are 2 top 25 teams and a chance for them to kind of bounce back from a bad loss this week.
Yeah, the upset I was most intrigued by were the 2 games that Purdue lost. They lost to Tennessee and lost to Western Kentucky. That Western Kentucky one really stings. Not even a top 150 team, according to KenPom. They need to win that game. I understand they did beat Arizona, but that's also, a team that lost 2 games, the previous 2 days. And when you're playing 3 games in a row, you have guys that are tired. They're kind of out of their element and, zero confidence from Arizona. So, yes, they did beat them, and that's a great quality of win. But I just think that's more taking advantage of the circumstances. Louisville, so that'll be a good game to watch. I'm definitely going to be watching that one to see how both those teams play with a lot of question marks on both sides and various ways, shapes, or forms. But Purdue losing to Western Kentucky and Tennessee, both of those are kind of bad losses. I don't think either one of those teams are going to be very good this year.
Which game was that?
Purdue, Western Kentucky.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, Purdue, there's so many question marks after how they played in the Bahamas. I mean, they blew out Arizona, but so did everybody else that played them. So I don't really think that's a good win on their resume, honestly, at this point in the season.
Yeah, at this point, I mean, Arizona could still come back, and then you kind of look at your schedule. It's like, oh, you beat Arizona, which is good, but you got to look at it as 3 games in 3 days in the Bahamas after Arizona lost 2 games in a row. So that's definitely tough. All right, next up, we're going to try a new segment, and it's new top 25 team or team that you were impressed by in the poll. So, Brett, I'm going to go to you. Who was a team that you were impressed by?
The team that I was most impressed by that moved up in the polls was Texas A&M. And I mean, you look at what Texas A&M has done early on in the season, and they started off the week 15, and they played some okay teams. I'm pretty sure that they played Pepperdine, which isn't really impressive. But then last night they were at USC, and USC is a top 10 team in the country. They're a very deep team in their backcourt, and they have one of the best backcourts in the country with Melton leading ahead. And then they got Metu too on the wing, and he can play inside. And then Texas A&M comes in and just steamrolls them 75-59. And nobody saw this coming. Some people may have seen Texas A&M being able to pull off an upset, but I don't think anybody thought that Texas A&M was going to win by 16, 17 points. I mean, DJ Hogg was fantastic in this one. He had 15 points, 8 rebounds, and their shooting was impressive and their defense was impressive. They shot 44% from the floor, but they only allowed USC to shoot 28% out of 71 shots that USC took. And yeah, part of that is that USC just could not make a basket to save their life. But Texas A&M was playing really good and scrappy defense. And that's something that could really work in their favor this season. If they can force turnovers like they did against USC and cause USC to get in foul trouble, then they can do that to anybody else in the SEC, which makes them a very prime candidate early on before the SEC season even starts for them to be the pretty much the team to beat, them in Florida. And then Kentucky is kind of third right now on my list. And that's not really something you see often. It's usually everybody's chasing Kentucky. This year, Kentucky may be chasing other people. And I think one of those teams is Texas A&M. They just look so good to start the season. They have a game on a neutral court December 5th against an Arizona team that, like we said, we don't really know how they'll look. Maybe they'll have Alkins back by then, and he'll definitely give them a boost. But other than that, that's their last biggest game before conference play starts. So Texas A&M, if they pick up a win against Arizona, they're going to be undefeated going into the SEC.
Yeah. My team that I was impressed by, even though they did lose last night to Duke, is it's going to be the Florida Gators. I was very impressed. I had never seen their grad transfer Igor Kolochov. I'm probably botching that name, but I'd never seen him play before, and I was impressed by him. He's just a natural scorer. You can give him the ball, he's going to go get a bucket. Chris Gioza is probably the fastest player in college basketball. He's going to get up and down the court. He's going to distribute. He does turn over the ball a little bit, but his assist rate is in the top 100 in the country, 33% assist rate thus far. So, combine Chioza with Kevon Allen, they've got a lot of talent on that Florida team. I'm buying high on Mike White. I like him as a coach very much. He's done a great job with that team. They did get 2 top 100 wins in the PK80, beating Stanford and Gonzaga. So it's going to be, I'm very high on Florida. They have this week off, so they're playing against Florida State next week. So hopefully they can kind of rest and recuperate from being out in Portland for a week and beat Florida State, which would be another humongous win for the Florida Gators. Chris
How about
Chioza, I'm telling you.
how about Jalen Hudson even? That just
Jalen Hudson too. Yeah. Oh yeah. He's
70,
shooting 47% from Three. So
76 points in 3 games in that tournament, and against good defensive teams too. Stanford, Gonzaga, and Duke. Like he scored 24 points, most of them being in the paint. He was 10 for 20 from the field, 2 for 6 from long range. 8 of his baskets were in the paint. And
I've never been big on Florida, but
he had 10 rebounds against Duke. And this is a guard that is kind of undersized for a wing. He stands 6'5", 6'6" sometimes, but he doesn't play big. And he muscled up yesterday against a big Duke team. And him and Chris Chioza just kind of ripped them apart in transition. And that Florida's going to be dangerous. They really are.
I think it's just going to be a matter of consistency from the Gators. They looked so good in that first half. They just got to keep that pace up and keep defending at a high level and forcing in those turnovers, which kind of feeds into their offense and that fast pace that they like to play. All right, so next up we're going to do our buy or sell as we usually do. So I'm going to throw one to Brett, and he's going to throw one back at me. So buy or sell, the AAC will have more than 2 teams in the NCAA tournament.
If I'm not buying this right now after seeing it this weekend, then I'm crazy. Yes, they're going to have more than 2 teams, and those 2 teams are obviously Cincinnati and Wichita State, like we've mentioned numerous times throughout the weeks. You look at some of the other teams in the AAC, you have Temple, who's looked outstanding to start the year, UConn even picking up a good win over Oregon in the PK80. SMU didn't look terrible in the Bahamas. I mean, they picked up a win over Arizona. They lost their first round game, I believe it was to Northern Iowa, so that's a bad loss, but a win over Arizona. And then Tulane and Houston have started off really hot as well. So I think, yeah, you need to buy this. I think they could have 3, 4 teams in even. I think SMU is a tournament team, and I think you're going to have a wild card. I think Temple, UConn, and Houston are all viable options. And like I said, Tulane has had a really good start to the season, and Memphis is even playing not terrible. So, I mean, the AAC is kind of looked down upon at times, and they're kind of looked at as a conference that will only get 1 to 2 teams per year. But I think this year it's going to change. They have some really good talent, and even at UConn, Jalen Adams is an excellent player. There's talent in that conference, and multiple teams can come out of it with no doubt in my mind.
I
So
think the key to the conference is going to. Oh, sorry.
no, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say the key to the conference is going to be that quality of teams. They have to have good non-conference seasons. So when they do get in the conference season, if you beat a Tulane or Houston or SMU, that is a quality win. So I think if you have a lot of teams that are not, kind of bottom dwellers and are kind of in the running for it, that helps each other. Even if they're beating each other up in conference play, it's good for the conference to have teams that are in the hunt and playing well, and that's going to bring up the level. And I think that could be the difference in between a lower level ACC team that really doesn't have any top wins versus a team, the AAC, that may have some good wins against maybe a Cincinnati or UConn or an SMU or a school like that. All right, do you have a buy or sell for me?
So my buy or sell question for you this week, Brad, is the SEC is deeper than we thought outside of just Florida and Kentucky and Texas A&M.
I'm going to buy and sell this. I think it's very deep, but I think people are selling it as like the greatest conference college basketball. I LSU's not that good. They had one decent win in Maui, but they're not that good. Arkansas looked good against UConn yesterday. I'm gonna have to wait and see. I need to watch a few more of their games before I judge on them. But Alabama, Texas A&M are both extremely quality teams. Those teams are going to be really good. Colin Sexton, as I mentioned, Robert Williams. There are some great players on both those teams. They're going to be forces to be reckoned with. I think it's kind of a top 4. I think it's going to be Florida, Kentucky, Alabama, Texas A&M. Obviously, Missouri falls off without Michael Porter Jr. So I think it's going to be kind of those 4, and then maybe everyone else, Arkansas being just a tier below those guys. So I'm going to kind of buy and sell because I think it's pretty deep, deeper than previous years, but I don't think it's as deep as everyone's saying it is. The SEC, the greatest conference, it's still pretty shallow, and those bottom dwellers are still there, kind of sucking on the league and creating a lot of bad matchups in conference play.
I mean, they're definitely going to own the bubble this year, no doubt.
To them and Clemson. Clemson's on the bubble still. I don't even know. I haven't even seen Clemson once this year, but they're on the bubble. I can tell you that much. All right. Next up, another good segment we do, Sweat, Don't Sweat. We talk about some teams that haven't played very well, maybe a bad loss, or avoided a bad loss, but didn't really look good in that effort. So we have a few teams here, and Brett and I say whether their fans should sweat or not sweat. First up, we've mentioned Arizona, lost to NC State, SMU, and Purdue. Are you sweating on Arizona?
I'm sweating, and I'm passing it to you. We don't really have to talk much about this.
All I have to say is I'm
sweating.
sweating as much as Sean Miller's sweating, which is a lot. Sean Miller's sweating a lot, so that's kind of where we're at.
If
All
you
right,
like the
next up,
Wildcats, you better be sweating.
absolutely, absolutely. All right, next up, Purdue, the team that beat them, but they did lose to Tennessee and Western Kentucky. I mentioned this earlier. Are you sweating on Purdue or not?
No, I'm not sweating yet on Purdue. I mean, you look at their losses, they had bad losses. Yeah, Tennessee and Western Kentucky are two bad losses. They kind of flipped the script, beat Arizona, yay. Walked out of the Bahamas, not finishing last. But they have a great chance to pick up some really good wins this week. Tomorrow, they'll take on my Louisville Cardinals at home, and they definitely have the advantage in that game, just being at home against a very kind of youth team in Louisville. I mean, outside their starters, their bench players are all new to the team. So that will definitely be a good game to watch and something that will be definitely intriguing to watch. And then later in the week, they take on Northwestern at home, and they are at Maryland on Friday. So those are all good games, and Big Ten play is already starting, which I can't believe, the first week of December. So I'm not sweating it on Purdue. I mean, I want to see more from them, and I think that they will show us more. They're one of the best scoring teams in the country so far this year, and they can shoot lights out when they get going. Carson Edwards, Vince Edwards, Dakota Mathias, all those guys have shown that they can be great shooters. And Purdue is averaging about 8, 9, 10 made threes a game. So if they can get that hot shooting going, especially against Louisville tomorrow, it could work in their favor, and they could pull off an upset at home.
I'm telling them to sweat, baby. You know why? Matt Painter is their coach, and they just think that they can replace Caleb Swanigan like that. People forget that Isaac Haas is not good at basketball. So it's basically the Edwards brothers, Vincent Edwards and Carson Edwards. That's their entire team. I think they should sweat because Matt Painter's not that good of a coach, and they basically only have two decent players. Don't give me this PJ Thompson is good or Isaac House is good. Don't give me any of that crap. They shouldn't be sweating, and I think they're going to lose to Louisville.
He has not been
What?
terrible to start the season.
He's not good. He's a defensive liability. For everything he adds on offense, he takes away 10 times on defense.
No, I'd have to agree with that.
So it'll be interesting. I think Louisville's going to beat them, though. And I can't wait to tell people that I told you so, especially Zach Beeler, College Pride Press writer. All right, next up, another team we talked about, St. Mary's. They lost to Washington State and Georgia. They had beat Harvard. Are you sweating or not sweating? I already said I'm sweating on this earlier, so we'll just get yours.
The Gales are not going to make the NCAA tournament this year. It is time to sweat. Even if they are a 2-3 loss team, 4 loss team, they will not make the tournament. If Monmouth didn't make the tournament a few years ago, St. Mary's isn't going to make the tournament.
Well, St. Mary's bench mob is not as good, so that's kind of how we're judging them.
Although I don't know if you can sweat in that thin air up there. I'm not too sure.
All right, finally, last sweat, don't sweat. Oregon, they did beat DePaul, but they lost to UConn and Oklahoma. Are you sweating with Dana Altman and the Oregon Ducks?
Well, I mean, their recruiting class next year is pretty impressive, and I think it's the best in the country right now. But if we're talking about this year, I'm definitely sweating. I mean, UConn and Oklahoma have proven that they're good teams, but they needed overtime to beat DePaul. And I think we can all agree that DePaul is not a good basketball program. You look at some of their other games, I mean, they swept through Coppin State and Prairie View. Everybody thought Oregon was going to be so good after those 2 wins. And then they hit a roadblock against Connecticut. And then they hit a roadblock against DePaul. And then they allowed Trae Young to put up like 100 points against them in that game. So, I mean, I'm sweating on Oregon. They'll probably be a 2-loss team going into conference play because they don't really have much left on their schedule. Although I do want to point out that Texas Southern, and I want to give a shout out to them. They're on Oregon's schedule coming up. But you have to admire what Texas Southern has done so far this year. They started the season on November 10th with a road game at Gonzaga, and their first home game of the season is January 1st. They have, let me just finish counting, they have 13 games before their first home game. They are traveling every day to go somewhere new. They have not practiced at their facility since the preseason, and they are still fighting and playing good games. I mean, they played a close one at Washington State, lost by 2 in overtime. were there with Ohio State for a while. They were there with Syracuse for a while, and they almost beat Clemson. So this Texas Southern team, they may go into conference play with an 0-13 record, but I think they're still going to come out of the Southwestern Conference. And I know I kind of brushed off the fact that Oregon needs to be sweating right now, but I just want to give a shout out to all you Texas Southern fans because your team has the strongest strength of schedule in the country and should be in the NCAA tournament just because of that. Go Texas Southern.
I mean, they haven't won a game yet. I think we need to mention that. They haven't won a game yet, but they have a great strength of schedule.
Number one,
like, I mean,
put them in.
Well, I mean, once you actually start playing like teams in your conference, it's going to be like a cakewalk compared to what you've played. I mean, that's insane.
Oh yeah, because
that's how they fund the athletic budget though, with all these buy-in games.
Yeah, no offense to Jackson State or Alabama State, but they're no Kansas or Syracuse. And if Texas Southern can hang on with them for maybe 10 minutes, I think they can handle them.
Absolutely. All right. That's it for Sweat or Don't Sweat this week. Before we look ahead to the ACC Big Ten, I just have one question to ask, Brett. Is Duke back?
When did they ever leave?
Last week they left. Last year.
Yeah, they had an early exit in the tournament, but I mean, did anybody think that they weren't going to be the number one team coming into the season this year after they got Marvin Bagley? I mean, I don't know. All I know is that they're probably going to just stampede through, and then they'll hit a roadblock here and there in ACC play and stumble through a little bit. But they're still they're going to be the number one overall in March. There's no way that they aren't.
That roadblock is going to come this Wednesday against the Indiana Hoosiers.
Okay.
Upset City. Come on. Assembly Hall is going to be rocking.
Oh, man. If Duke man.
All right. That's a perfect segment to talk about our ACC Big Ten Challenge this week. What kind of stands out to you in terms of matchups? Obviously, it's underway. Syracuse, Maryland already played. Wisconsin and Virginia wrapping up right now. What stands out to you in terms of this slate of games?
Notre Dame at Michigan State. I think that stands out to everybody. Top 5 matchup, Mike Brey versus Tom Izzo, and Tom Izzo has kind of struggled against top 5 teams in his career, but it's mainly the blue bloods. So if you're a Michigan State fan, I don't think you have much to be worried about. I think Michigan State is going to beat Notre Dame. They're going to give Notre Dame a short-lived week in the top 5 and then boot them back to about 8, 9 maybe. So they'll still be in the top 10. But go Sparty this weekend. And Josh Langford, Miles Bridges, Jaren Jackson, that trio right there will set them apart. And I think they're personally going to out-rebound Notre Dame by a big margin in this one.
Josh Langford finally showed up. He finally was like, oh, shoot, I remember I'm like a really good basketball player and haven't shown that for like a year and a half.
Don't forget Nick Ward. I mean, he's still there, and so is Matt.
Nick Ward, Cassius Winston. That team's there. Really good.
Matt McQuaid. This could be the breakout game for Matt McQuaid.
Tom Izzo was not happy with Matt McQuaid last game, so he may just like not play at all. He was screaming at him.
A time will come.
All right. A couple games that stood out to me. Number 1, Miami, Minnesota. I'm high on both these teams before Minnesota couldn't even beat a 3-man squad. So both these teams kind of could go either way. Bruce Brown, really good. Watch out for Jordan Murphy. I think this is going to be a great matchup. Minnesota's a little bit bigger. Miami's got a little bit better guards. I'm looking forward to this. That one's going to be a good one at the barn. Another one that's kind of off the radar, people aren't talking about, Penn State, NC State. Both have looked really good this year. Penn State has had some talent. They had some good young guys that are kind of growing and developing. NC State finally has a halfway decent coach with Kevin Keatts. Omar Yurtseven is still there. He scored 91 points in a game like 2 years ago. So people need to remember Omar Yurtseven. He's going to be an absolute stud. So I think that game, both those teams are going to end up being on the bubble, I think. So if they're able to win, I think it's going to be a nice kind of boost, kind of catapult into what could be a good conference season for both these teams that are kind of hinging on whether they're going to be in the basement or maybe they're going to have a shot to being at the NCAA tournament.
Don't sleep on Syracuse either. I mean, this game I was kind of watching back and forth coming into the night, and they played tonight home against Maryland, and were able to scratch out a 72-70 win. So Syracuse is 6-0 on the season. They do have a win against Texas Southern. I want to point that out. And now they have a win against Maryland. And Syracuse looks pretty good so far. I mean, their defense looks good. They're allowing their opponents about 60, 61 points a game right now. And they're scoring in the 70s consistently. So they're looking good going into a neutral court matchup against Kansas this week. And I think that's going to be a really good game. Not overlooking it just because Kansas is number 2 and Syracuse unranked. Syracuse isn't even going to keep up with them. Well, Kansas is playing with 6 guys right now, assuming Billy Preston doesn't play. So 6 guys against a 2-3 zone that runs in transition can be a little worrisome. I still think Kansas will win this one against Syracuse, but don't sleep on the Orange. That's an upset watch game for me. I think Syracuse is capable of pulling off an upset on Kansas.
Yeah, and another point on Syracuse, Tyus Battle looked really good tonight against Maryland. Definitely someone to watch. Jim Boeheim can still coach. They still got that 2-3 that throws teams kind of for a loop. Definitely a different style of play that they have, and they finally probably the second busiest week in college basketball in terms of non-conference schedules with the ACC Big Ten Challenge and other top matchups going on. So I'll throw it to Brett for kind of his last remarks.
Yeah, it's going to be a full slate of games this week and some really good ones like we mentioned. Notre Dame at Michigan State, a top 5 matchup. Creighton at Gonzaga, even a top 25 matchup. That one's on Friday. And Creighton's a team that a lot of people are sleeping on too, and Gonzaga has a chance to redeem themselves early on in the season. They have not looked great, and they have a chance to really do some damage. And then the last team I want to touch on is the Baylor Bears. Baylor looks fantastic to start the season. Nobody really knows what kind of zone they're playing. Is it a 1-2-2? Is it a 1-3-1? Is it a 1-1-1-2? Nobody really knows what Baylor is playing. And it seems to change about every 2 minutes on the court, but it's working. So whatever works for you guys down in Baylor, keep to it. You guys are looking great. But I think the momentum will stop this week. They go to Xavier tomorrow. That's going to be a closely fought game. I've been back and forth flipping my pick all day and all night. So we will have an updated version tomorrow when Brad posts our pick 'em for the week. And whatever he posts, that will be my lock for the week. But I'm still not sure about it. So I may still flip-flop throughout the night. But that's the one that will count. And then they will play, like I said, Wichita State later on in the week as well. And that one is going to be on Saturday. Number 8, Wichita State at number 16, Baylor. And it kind of seems like a lopsided game. Wichita State looked pretty good in the Maui Invitational, wound up losing off of turnover late in the game to Notre Dame. But they still look like a solid top 5, top 10 team in the country. And they're going to be a team that's going to be in the second weekend in March, no doubt in my mind. So Baylor has a chance to really pull off 2 big wins this week. If they can beat Xavier and Wichita State, they'll have a really good resume moving on, looking forward to Big 12 play. And like last year, Baylor was ranked 1 at some point. I'm not saying that they're as good as last year, but they look really, really good to start the season. If that 1-1-1-2 zone continues to work for them, then continue it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be a crazy week. Lots of great matchups. As my closing remark, I'm going to give you 3 reasons why Indiana could potentially pull off an upset of number 1 Duke. Number 1, Duke has not been home since last week. They've been in Portland, and I believe they came to Bloomington today. Number 2, Duke plays 4 freshmen. And number 3, they have never played in a true road environment this season. The Champions Classic and PK80 are not road environments. Assembly Hall is going to be so loud. If some of those shooters kind of get hot, Devontae Green, watch out. It could be a troublesome night for the Duke Blue Devils. Coach K is gonna age a few years. Returning to Assembly Hall. It'll be. I'm hoping it could be a good game, but I'm not really sure about that. I'm very hopeful. Also, Brett mentioned our picks.
Right now, I'm going to give you 2 reasons why Duke will win that game in Assembly Hall
Oh,
against IU. Number one, Marvin Bagley is on the team. And number two, I looked into the future, and Duke's record after they play IU is 9-0. So for that reason alone, Duke will be IU.
oh, dear God. Okay, well, next week's podcast is going to be a lot of fun then. As Brett mentioned, we're going to be posting our picks. We have about 10 or 11 writers that pick about all the top games. So we will post that, and we do have our top 25 poll posted for this week already. So check that one out. Check our picks out and see if we picked your team or not. I'm not in last place this year for picks, so I'm just happy to be out of the basement. That's where I'm happy to be there.
And
All right, so
my new NBA draft board coming out this Friday,
yes.
which will be December 1st. So check for that because people are dropping like flies and people are moving up in the world. So a new draft board coming out. Be sure to check that out.
Yeah, absolutely. Check that one out. We're gonna have tons of great content for you guys, and we shall be back with our podcast on Sunday as scheduled to recap the Big Ten ACC Challenge and everything else going on in college basketball. So have a great week, everyone. Thanks to Brett for joining me, and have fun watching college basketball.